On Thursday, April 11th, we found out Newark's only movie theater, Cityplex 12, the ownership of which includes Shaquille O'Neal and Boraie Development, a theater, in fact, that symbolizes the redevelopment of Newark and which has been championed by Mayor Cory Booker, suddenly canceled our film about Mumia Abu-Jamal, pulling it from their schedule. With this act, they have effectively blocked Newark citizens from seeing the film and witnessing Mumia's powerful story. All right, let's go. Films being pulled from theaters. When was the last time we've witnessed that kind of behavior after the fact? After a film has been booked. The last one I remember is the Last Temptation of Christ by Martin Scorsese, and I had to cross a picket line filled with nuns that night. Talk about how sad it is for the folks in Newark, obviously overwhelmingly black, who are being excluded from seeing this film, seeing this story.
You know, when I first heard it, I thought of something that most people perhaps would not have thought of, and that's the great Paul Robeson, one of my heroes, really.
Yeah.
One of my real heroes. A man who spoke his mind in about 28 languages, no less, but who never bit his tongue, who spoke about, racism, fascism, the American way of apartheid. And he, people demonstrated against him, and they tried everything they could to shut him up. But here, let me tell you one story, if I may.
Yeah.
This call is from the State Correctional Institution at Mahanoy and is subject to monitoring and recording.
So the point of the story is simply that, that's where he went to school. He went to Rutgers, and that's where he spent many years of his life. He didn't die there, but he spent many of his young years there. And there was once a time, his son tells the story, where he was visited by a high-ranking official of the NAACP. And the guy had a check for $1 million for him. And he said, "What's that for?" And the guy says, "Look, all we want you to do is shut up, and you can have this check." And Paul Robeson said, "You don't have enough money." And the guy who brought the check had tears in his eyes and said, "We knew you would say that, but we had to try." The fact that this is happening in Paul Robeson City is really a shame. And like you said, that the vast majority of the African American and Latino community is prevented from seeing a story about really their own lives and their struggles, or the struggles of their fathers and mothers, is a double tragedy. But I may have told you this, I think, when you last visited, about a young brother up here who came up and asked an older guy around my age, was Martin Luther King a rapper?
Yeah.
Wow. You know what I mean? That's why people ask those kinds of questions, because what do they know?
Yeah.
What do they learn in school? What do they read in the paper? Nothing. And so when we try to tell a story that comes from the life of struggle, sure they object, and we expect them to object.
I really like your statement earlier on the weekend when you asked the rhetorical question, why don't they want you to see this film? And for a film that was so embraced by the city of Newark, I cannot tell you how much support and how much promotion was going on with this film. This was a film that was greatly anticipated. Nobody was tiptoeing around, and someone brought the hammer down. And I know Dave Zirin is writing a piece right now, and I've talked to Chris Hedges, I've talked to Lynn Washington, so you've never remained silent, and in that tradition, we're not going to remain silent as well.
But Steve, it's also a kind of sign of our success, because what they fear most is us reaching people,
yeah,
and moving people, and telling them of a story, a life of resistance to the empire. Believe it or not, you were talking about the Last Temptation of Christ. Well, it will not stop us, and this you know.
No, and what's really interesting is the cowardice on these people's part. I've contacted the theater. We've contacted the development company that owns the theater. We called Mayor Cory Booker, who has his eyes on a big prize, and nobody who had supported the theater, who knew about this film, goes on the record and, at least have the guts to say why you're doing it. So, it's cowardice, and it's really mind-bending.
But it's also the politics of quietude. They do not want the natives to be restless.
That's for sure.
And when you look at the condition of Newark, of Philadelphia, of Roxbury, of D.C., of Oakland, Well, damn it, the natives have a whole lot to be restless about, don't they? There was 30 schools being closed in Philadelphia, 50 in Chicago. And again, if they don't know their history of resistance, then they can't see the possibility of them participating in those kinds of struggles. That's the story of long distance. You know that, I know that, they know that, and they don't want that story told.
Yeah.
They want them to quietly go into that dark night.
Yeah, talk briefly about the difference between official censorship by a government entity and that kind of de facto systemic censorship that's carried out by corporate elites and their lapdogs in the press.
Well, look at it this way. I was looking through some of my notes earlier today, and I came across an Iraq War-related story from probably one of the most famous foreign correspondents in the world, Christiane Amanpour.
Right.
She was on CNBC, and this is her quote. It's really quite delicious. She says, "I think the press was muzzled, and I think the press self-muzzled. I'm sorry to say, but certainly television, and perhaps to a certain extent my station," she was speaking of CNN then, "was intimidated by the administration and its foot soldiers at Fox News. And it did, in fact, put a climate of fear and self-censorship, in my view, in terms of the kind of broadcast work we did." That's Christiane Amanpour.
Yeah.
That's talking about war and peace. And rather than give the people the truth about war and peace, they gave them the official story, and look at the cost. The costs are horrific in this country and in Iraq. And we're just beginning to see the cost. That's what censorship can do.
Yeah. It allows
Brother
it
man,
to
they're
continue.
about to pull the plug.
All right, man. I love you. I will see you.
Too.
I'll see you next week.
Okie dokie.
All right, man.
All power.
All right. Take care. On the move.